Hello, I'm Matthew Sealand, and thank you for listening to my passion project. My passion project is about 3D printing. My main question is, what is a 3D printer? There are other 5 big questions. They are, what is a 3D printer, also called additive manufacturing, and what is the difference between it and a 3D laser printer? How does a 3D printer work, and how can you make an object out of a 3D printer? Who uses a 3D printer, and how can a 3D printer be used at school? Any recommendations for a school 3D printer, and how did and can a 3D printer evolve? First, I'll explain a 3D printer. A 3D printer is a machine that lays heated material, most commonly plastic, on a surface and repeats the process over and over again to build the material up to form a shape. The material comes out of a nozzle and cools quickly. The machine's size depends on the project size, but it's usually as big as a mini fridge. The time the 3D printer takes to make an object depends on how big the project is. It can also take from an hour to 24 hours to create the printed piece, not to mention the hardening time, which takes an hour to 6 hours. It also depends on how fast you have the 3D printer set to. The key principle to keep in mind though, the faster you set the printer to, the less detail the piece will have. 3D printing and 3D laser printing are two totally different things. 3D printing builds up layers of material to form an object, and 3D laser printing cuts things out. 3D printing can only use certain materials to create an object, while 3D laser printing can use almost any material that can be cut. 3D laser printing has advantages and disadvantages. The major advantage is that 3D laser printing doesn't require the use of expensive material. The major disadvantage of 3D laser printing is that laser printer cannot build the creation, so you have to manually put the layers together piece by piece. 3D printing has advantages and disadvantages also. The major advantage for a 3D printer is that it can mold layers of the project together, so you have a finished project right away. A major disadvantage is that you need a lot of material to make a project, and it could get expensive if you have a big project. How do you make a 3D project? The printer knows what to make by software. Usually you have to pay for the software, but some good software is free. PLA and ABS is most commonly used, and it's a thermoplastic. Special plastics are also available. Some add wood and metal to the plastics, and some even add additive to make it flexible. A 3D printer process starts by heating up the printer head, usually above 200 degrees Celsius. It takes about 5 minutes for the printer head to fully heat up. This melts the material, usually plastic, and the liquid material to come out very thin layers. These layers dry fast. Many layers are added, which build up to create the desired project. There are 3 stages for the creation of a plastic 3D piece. Number 1, prep. Connect the 3D printer to your computer programming software and specifies the desired creation. 2, create. Turn on the 3D printer to heat up the printer head, melt the plastic filament, and build the project layer by layer. 3, cooling. The final project must cool and harden before it could be used or displayed. Now to question 3. Who uses a 3D printer, and how can a 3D printer be used at school? Some cutting-edge companies are using 3D printing now. They have built houses, mass-produced small bolts, large automotive parts, and even created a substitute for body parts. A doctor made a 3D sonogram of what the baby looked like for a blind pregnant woman. Other trailblazers are using 3D printing are really big companies, like Local Motors, who use the 3D printers to make 3D printed cars. The crazy thing is, the car is one piece. Although 3D printing is being used now, it will be even used more in the future. So it's critical that young minds get a grasp of how to use 3D printing early on. In schools, 3D printing can be used to mass produce pieces for a play or decoration. It also can be used to create a mini model of objects being taught in class, such as science class. Now you must be asking, which of the 2 printers would be the best for our school? Although 3D printers is the Cadillac of printers, it's much more expensive than a 3D laser printer, and the technology is still evolving. On top of that, the operation costs are much higher because it does not use readily available materials or recyclables. The top-of-the-line 3D printers cost up to $3,000, and the top-of-the-line commercial-grade 3D printers can cost up to $185,000. The solution may be a 3D laser printer. It's less expensive than the 3D printer, and this technology is already evolved, so it won't be outdated right away. It cannot use typical printer paper because it's too thin, but it can use many readily available materials and recyclables like wood, cardboard, and more. The top-of-the-line 3D laser printer is $2,000, but the commercial brand isn't that much more. But I think the best option is the hybrid 3D printer, called the Flux 3D printer. It's a scanner, 3D printer, and 3D laser printer in one. That was my #1 choice for the school, but it only cost $499, super cheap. But the catch is you have to build it. It'll give you the components in the kit, but you need to put it together and set it up. Despite that, I think it'll be a really good choice for school. Good inventions are recognized instantly, but fade away from memory as generations go by because new inventions take their place and the use is not critical to everyday life. Take for instance the electrically heated jacket, the radio hat, or even the fax newspaper. By the second and third generation, people often look at these old inventions and say, what is that? Or how come it didn't catch on? The world doesn't remember good inventions for long, but they do remember great inventions. Great inventions almost never catch on quickly. Cars were around before Henry Ford made the Model T, but cars back then were overpriced and weren't durable and practical in everyday use. When Henry Ford made the Model T much more affordable and reliable, it became more popular over the years. This is the same with the 3D printer. The first 3D printer was made in 1983. It first started becoming mainstream in the 2000s. It's come a long way since then. At first, 3D printers could only use a couple of materials like plastic and could not print very big or very small objects. In 2005, 3D printers at Pratt Institute created a small replica of what their cars looked like. It worked very similar to an HP printer, and they even used HP printing nozzles. The results were dramatically different, though. The 3D printer kept on building up and up, and they created an amazing object. What's next in the evolution of 3D printing? More intelligent and innovative programming is coming soon. This will make the objects more precise and detailed. Speeding up the process with technological advances is also expected. The sky's the limit with our creative minds, so someone in the class may come up with the next great idea of the 3D printing invention. Thank you for listening to my project, and I hope you learned more about 3D printing today. I hope you have a great day, and I strongly suggest the school to take a look at buying the Flux 3D printer. I have a link in my citations.